Great. All right. Good. Good thing I didn't forget. We record these sessions and we send the recording in professional notes to everyone that fills out the survey. So we'll be asking that. One of the things that we've heard in the surveys is people wish, several people have told us that they wish that these were longer. And that is something that we'd love to do, although we're asking people like Akshay to already give up an hour. So we want to be mindful of everybody's time. That being said, we mentioned a program that we're launching, a 2-month part-time program that we're launching that has a deadline coming up this Friday. And we're taking applications now. We've already interviewed several people and extended several offers in the last week or so. And this is a program where you will be able to work more closely with each instructor and in a small class size. So if you want longer sessions, if you want to go deeper in a lot of these topics in product sales, marketing, and operations, check out that program and reach out to us if you have any questions about that. Deadline is this Friday. It's just school16.co/program. This is the agenda for today. I'm going to stop talking in about 1 minute, and Akshay will get started asking Akshay the first question. Discussion and open Q&A is kind of toward the end. But that being said, type in your questions throughout. If Akshay says something and you want to follow up or you have a question, just type it in, and if we think it's relevant and pertinent to the conversation, we will ask it. So that being said, Vadim, did I miss anything? And if not, then we're going to get started with Akshay.
No, that's great. I think perfect. So now that you're just sharing the video, we'll have the slides back up at the very end again so you guys can get access to the survey link. So as a reminder, hearing a little feedback. As a reminder, you can drop questions into the chat as they come up throughout the conversation. So no need to wait until the very end to do that. Feel free to do that as you're going along. As a matter of fact, the earlier we see a question, the higher likelihood that it's going to be asked, and we'll make sure to leave time to ask that particular question. If your question doesn't get addressed, we're sorry. Nothing personal. It's just we can't get to all of them. But awesome. All right, let's just get started. If you're just joining, because I see there's about 45 people on the call, you joined right in time because we're just getting started with Akshay. So Akshay, we're really excited to have you on because you have had a pretty incredible career. It started off in consulting, which is a path that a lot of people take after college. And then, like many people that decide that being a lifer consultant or lifer investment banker is not for them, you decided to get into tech, and you landed at Google, where you did strategy and operations. And the story that we're going to get into today is also how you navigated such a massive behemoth that Google is. If you've ever been to Google's offices in New York City, it's basically, I mean, it is the city block. It's massive. It's very easy to get lost. They have scooters to get around within the office. But I want to also, we're going to get to how you navigated the role within Google. But first, if you could just tell us a little bit about how you made that transition from consulting to Google to get into a big tech company, and anything else you want to share with us to fill the gaps of kind of the early days of your career.
No, totally. And so firstly, thank you both for having me. I think a lot of praise, hopefully deserved. We'll see over the course of the hour. A couple of caveats I want to give out, just sort of like standard operating procedure is like, these are my opinions, not any of the companies I've worked for before or currently work for. And I think the other part of that I'll stress is, given it's my opinion, I would urge you to question what you hear from anybody, right? It's like, our experiences are tinged with survivorship bias, and you should contextualize these stories and these sort of guidance posts as like how they fit into your own career, your own proclivities, your own passions and ambitions. So I think that's one thing I will say. There is really no singular right path, but we deal in probabilities, and like probabilistically, we can talk about sort of how big tech thinks about these things. So back to the intro now. So thank you for that great intro. I did, actually before consulting, I was a research fellow at UT Austin working on clean tech and smart grid work. And that was sort of always my driving path and career in life. I saw sort of what are the big problems I want to go solve. And, I thought the environment, climate change was one of the biggest, if not the biggest issues that our generation will feel. And I was feeling this in undergrad from 2006 to 2010. And then I went to grad school for a couple of years. And on that journey, decided that sort of academia and that going a mile deep on an inch wide problem wasn't for me. Had some really fortunate experiences to do startup consulting and sort of like working with small businesses, ended up making that a full-time career path. Went to Accenture in their management consulting practice for 3 years. And just like you said, along the way, it was like, this is not the life that I want. You know, like my MDs are getting on the same 6 a.m. Monday morning flights and taking the same, like night flights Thursday, and sort of like living sort of two separate lives. And further, I'd gotten into consulting for that express purpose of building skill sets and sort of building that gravitas to sort of be a business operator in a field that I cared about. And I used that, it was tech, media, telecom consulting. And I looked at sort of the available exit opportunities too. Man, there are a few. There wasn't a specific one, but what drew me to Google specifically was the idea that it wasn't just an ads company. It wasn't just a sort of consumer products company. It was a company that sort of took, its success in the commercial marketplace and a great product with competitive advantage and high returns on invested capital, and use some of that to spawn new businesses in a way that many corporations can't do, right? So, it was, let's be thoughtful about our investments. Let's invest in future defining tech that has societal impact. And that's what brought me to Google. And a little bit what I'll talk about later in my journey is sort of this idea of, like I landed in strategy and operations as a landing pad that was the greatest analog to my existing skill set. What I want to do is different, and I'm currently doing it. I'm sort of working on a small incubated team in-house to launch a company within Google. And we'll see where that goes. But sort of everything is a stepping stone to something else. I spent maybe 6+ months recruiting and thinking about what that next move from consulting was. It didn't come easy, and sort of like I can think about my career now as a nice outcome that I'm very grateful for, and sort of like great growth opportunities. But it certainly wasn't so crystal clear getting here. And it's like, you look back and it makes more sense than that in the previous ones.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's easy to look at someone that has attained any level of success or some level of success or anything that somebody else wants, and think, oh, they maybe had connections or they had it easy, but it actually is never the case. It's just that you don't hear about the hardship. So I do want to talk a little bit about that, because if nothing else, we want to have as much transparency as possible in these sessions, and our guests always are. We really love that. That's part of the value, actually, for everybody that's here today. That's part of the value of joining in on sessions like this. This is not something you're going to see on like a public website or something like that. That's promotional material. This is the nitty gritty. And so talk about that 6 months when you wanted to get out of consulting and you weren't really clear on the path. Maybe you had other opportunities that came your way. Tell me, did you leave that consulting job before you got the offer at Google at all? How did you sort of evaluate the risk? Maybe you had other opportunities to join, let's say, an early stage startup versus a big company like Google. So talk about that 6 months and how you made your decision.
Yeah. So yeah, great question. That definitely messy, breaking a lot of eggs. I was considering a couple of different paths, right? I think, business school is a very common path after management consulting, and I was thinking about doing that full time. And I was thinking about maybe some other consulting firms as well as some other tech companies. And it ended up coming down to, I frankly, there were 2 interviews that I had before getting the Google offer that I did not get. So cards on the table, in the spirit of transparency, these are really not easy journeys, and you should be ready for a little bit of pain and have resilience and grit in that process. And again, know that there's not just one path, but I did have a decision point between Google and sort of moving forward with another firm, and sort of pursuing that further. And what drew me to Google was this earlier stage company it was not in a domain that I was passionate about. And if I was taking a step out into a riskier startup world, I wanted it to be something I was really diehard passionate about. And I saw Google as a phenomenal place to skill up, be immersed with incredibly smart people on a daily basis and sort of learn more before I was ready to really make that entrepreneurial leap myself. So that was that. But yeah, it's just a lot of phone screens, a lot of conversations, a lot of exploration that came along the way.
Yeah, look, there's a reason why they say looking for a job is a full-time job. You have to be really committed especially if you care about your career, right? If you're not just looking for whatever.
Sorry. Sorry, Vadim, just one thing I forgot to answer that you asked was, I did not quit my job before taking the Google offer. I can give my advice is, I think that is a more challenging path, because I think there's a sort of psychological leverage that you have when you have a job already that sort of gives you a little more confidence through the process. I mean, even having one offer and having the Google offer in hand gave me more confidence in this other path, right? So I think there's again, everyone's situation is different, and I think it really depends on what that individual situation is. Good.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And to be honest, I actually, Sergey and I always talk about how we've shifted careers several times in our lives, and I've never quit a job if I had income coming in before looking for another job, for example. I've had times where I didn't have a job and I was looking for a job, for sure, but I never quit a job. Usually you can do both. But I'm curious, it looks like you had a few other opportunities at early stage companies. They didn't pan out. And then you landed in what ended up being a strategy and operations lead role at Google. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, I've looked at jobs at Google before. There's literally, it's a massive organization. You could probably do a lot of different things. You've had a little bit of background in clean tech. You're coming from a consulting background, which is inherently relatively broad. You're a business strategist. So how did you narrow down on that? Did you have other positions that you were exploring at Google as well? And what do you think was the reason why you ultimately landed that role?
Yeah, totally. So that was the job that I wanted, right? I mean, I think this was 2016, and the biz ops job category was sort of like on fire then. It was this idea of like, okay, management consultants do have a role in tech. It's to run the business, and sort of like every business has different needs, every team has different needs, strategic, analytical. So that was one thing that, it was what I wanted to do. I was actually, it's great that you mentioned that. I was recruited by Google for a finance role. I was recruiting for a financial analyst role. And I started the pathway with them on that. And I was like sort of lukewarm about it, very, very gung-ho about the company, but the financial analyst role wasn't what I was doing today. It wasn't something I wanted to develop and pursue further, but I saw it as a foot in the door. And then maybe it was like, I had a great phone screen. I was like ready for my interview with the hiring manager. And then maybe like a few days before, another recruiter, seeing my resume in the system, reached out and says, "Hey, we have this internal consultant, strategy and operations lead role supporting the global business organization. Are you interested?" I said, "Absolutely. How do I tell this other team I don't do it?" And she was like, "We'll take care of it." And she did, and that was great. But now that process took a while. I can talk about the recruiting process for big tech as well at some other point. But the role really, to your point, depends on which team you join. And I suspect this is similar across tech, right? So, there are various product teams or operational teams or product ops teams or sales teams or service teams. And at Google, the way we work is we have functionalized strategy teams that support individual business units. And each of those business units will have their own challenges to solve, right? So the challenges of a sales organization of how many ever thousand will be very different than maybe a small product being incubated that needs strategy support. So I support the global business organization, like more specifically on the customer success side. And for us, we have to think about how do you run a 4,000 person organization, and what does that look like from an ongoing basis in terms of ongoing business planning? What are new strategic initiatives you want to do? What are the KPIs the business should be tracking? What are the operational sort of like hygiene pieces that you need to implement into the organization to add rigor? That's especially interesting in a place like Google, which is sort of marked by this very entrepreneurial and vibrant culture. And it's that, but it's at the same time, we're now like 80,000, 90,000 people globally. And you have to find that balance in the middle and toe the line between rigor and like operational discipline, along with enabling the creativity of an organization to flourish. And that is actually that middle is where we operate. Sort of like, what do you implement? How do you think about growth initiatives and efficiency initiatives that sort of fit that culture?
That's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure these roles, even across business units, can look wildly different. Can you, I think Marco actually had a really interesting question, which is, the fact that like you had this consulting background that I think made you pretty marketable in the role. I mean, at least they knew that there was these certain skills that you acquired that you could actually then bring to Google. If you didn't have that consulting background, what would you do to skill up to be marketable and possible to make yourself basically hireable for that role without that consulting experience? What do you think you would do?
Totally. And I think we should acknowledge that the consulting background is sought after in these roles and valued in these roles, right? So that's a truth, and we should accept
Right.
that. Now, that being said, within my org, within my team, I know other strategy units at Google, and I'm sure elsewhere in other businesses, is that strategy is not just, it is analytical, it is modeling, it is strategic thinking and all of that. But it's also having an acute domain knowledge of the space that you're trying to consult for, right? And I see successful entrants come from both. I see the traditional consulting iBanker path. I also see, on my team, salespeople are phenomenally successful in this strategy and operations lead role because they know the business, they know the front line, they see what happens day to day. And when we talk about strategic initiatives that impact sellers, for example, they live that. That lived experience is invaluable when it comes to implementation and execution down the line. So there are a lot of ways, but I think those are the two primary paths. You can be a functional expert and sort of be called upon for those skill sets, or you can excel in a domain and sort of maybe that path is more internal transition onto a strategy team within the company that you're at, so that you can then go badge up, if you will, get those skills, and then use that to move around the industry.
Okay, got it. Makes sense. So that within specific business units and specific strategy roles, if you have some vertical specific experience, that could also translate. Um, Now, can you give us a little bit more of a sense of what the role actually is? If you could maybe talk about the day-to-day, because again, strategy sounds cool, but what is it really, and what are you doing every day when you come into the office?
Totally. So my role title is strategy and operations lead, and it is genuinely a blend of the two, right? So for those that are management consultants, there's a level of, and there's greater extensive partnering, but at some point you're able to walk away. You're able to sort of like go on to the next project and move on with your life, and that you don't get that in internal strategy. There's a level of you are partnering with the business for the long term. It's not just putting together a shiny deck. It is put together a deck, do the analysis, do it at a high level, but also make sure it's implementable. So my team specifically, I'll talk about the role that I had for 3 years, not the one that I'm recently taking. But that strategy and operations role, we supported a VP of customer success, and that person ran an organization of 4,000 people. And for them, they had various priorities throughout the year that we were sort of their, I don't know, shoulder to crown's like not the right word, but like we were the SWAT team, if you will, of investigating these challenges, making recommendations, and then being the conduit to program management teams that would then go implement the changes, right? So what that could look like is that could look like running the business planning process, which is a 3-month long initiative, right? It's like you need to think about how many people you need to service a footprint for next year. And you have to think about all the ways to triangulate what that estimate is, right? There's a level of analytical forecasting that goes into play. You look through data, you look at volumes that you've had, and then you forecast how many people you need. Then there's a qualitative strategic piece on connecting with stakeholder teams and connecting with teams on the ground to see how their business is changing over time, getting those insights back into recommendations. And then there's a very large piece, I think more than 50% of my job is engaging with people and like sort of like exhibiting deep levels of empathy and understanding of people's jobs and knowing that the recommendations you're making affect people's jobs and careers. And they may know more than you. And they almost certainly will know more than you um, about the specific jobs and sort of things that need to be done, right? So those are obviously more relevant in things like change management and sort of how do we think about how we organize our teams, for example, but it sort of spans again.
So given the breadth of that role, how then are you measured in a role like that? Like what are the KPIs that you're measured on, and what else?
Um, Yeah, so we have 6-month performance cycles, and different orgs at Google are measured differently. It's all in the OKR system. I actually forgot what it stands for, but there's like, oh yeah, objectives and key results. That's right. That's embarrassing. But this OKR system is basically set at the beginning of a quarter or a half to say what are your goals for the next 6 months, and it could be executing on XYZ projects. It could be sort of learning and development goals that you have. But you set them jointly with your manager and with your director to balance what the org needs and where you want to go in your career. And that is a large part of it, right? I can tell you, I think I think what's more interesting is sort of like what skills are sort of measured and what is valued in this type of role. And I think it's largely threefold. I think one is, just take some notes here. One is this idea of like effective structured problem solving, right? So can you look at a business problem? Can you decompose it into its unit parts and really think in a structured way, how do you solve a problem? It's not, oh, I know the answer. It's here's my hypothesis. Let me go break down, do the analysis on what the answer is, and then come back. The second part is more and more inescapably analytical and data skill sets, right? So we have lots of data, but sometimes it's not extremely well structured. So you have to know how to sort of interact with that data, which is candidly things like SQL or other database management tools. Then there's the sort of basic spreadsheeting and analytical processes like statistical analysis, pivot tables, pretty basic stuff is I think the table stakes for the job. And then translating that into effective presentation, right? So I think that's the last part. So putting that together. That was all pillar 2. And then the third pillar is, like I said, this idea of like stakeholder influence management and empathy, right? I mean, a lot of this is you need to, in a soft way, sell your recommendations as being sound. And that goes far beyond the sort of brass tacks like math and into the, here's, I'm understanding the incentive systems of people in this organization and different business leaders and how does their view play a role. So I think it's a lot of that. And I think if you can be effective at those 3 things, that's probably my shortcut answer to what we interview for, as well as how to be good at the job.
Yeah, and I would imagine that, for people listening, they might be thinking like, oh, I think I could be good at these things. But it's also important to be able to highlight what you've done before that could directly speak to your ability to actually handle these tasks. But to kind of circle back to your interview process, what I'm curious about, you mentioned problem solving, for example, being able to take something complicated and break it down to smaller parts and think about it more abstractly, evaluating your analytical skills and the like. Can you talk about what your experience was during the interview process for how they tested that? Because, if you're doing a coding interview, I get it. You have to solve coding problems. But here, that wasn't the case. So how did they test that during the interview?
Totally. And I've interviewed people for our teams and I will say, it's easy for me to say sitting on my end of the table, but having gone through the process, I do believe in the sort of meritocracy at a high level of how we think about interviewing, right? So Google has a rubric that I think is circulating in the ether. I would Google Google's 4 interviewing attributes, and there are very structured components, and that is how we evaluate candidates, right? And it's how effective a problem solver are you? I'm paraphrasing this point. What are your leadership skills like? What are your analytical abilities? And sort of like your Googliness, right? Which is like sort of this idea of like, and that means so many different things to different people. Are you passionate about sort of like the mission? What are you passionate about in general, right? Are you collaborative? Are you somebody that you want to work with? These are all sort of lumped into that. When I do it, I will have questions that sort of align with each of these attributes. And, these interviews are 30 minutes to an hour long, 45 minutes on average. And it is challenging to get a feel for a person in that amount of time. So for that reason, it felt onerous when I was going through it, but I went through 4 interviews of 45 minutes to an hour each with folks on the team and the cross-functional people on the teams, and then one with the director that I was going to have. And it's just adding more data points so they can get a better calibrated idea of, is this person a fit for the role and for Google? So I think that's a lot of it, right? So, but given we have if we're talking about, let's talk about problem solving, right? So if it's problem solving, what I'm going to ask is I'm going to ask an actual case question, right? Like there are problems that are going on in my world that I'm facing right now, and I want to see how you do on the job. And it's obviously not doing the job. You can't do that in 30 minutes. But what you can do is you can lay out a process. You can outline. You can think about how you think about it. You'd figure out what data you want. And I think that's like sort of like as good a proxy as you're gonna get in a fun interview, right? It's not a coding interview where it's like you know exactly what to look for in that. Like it's not that. But we try to make it as applied and hands-on and practical as possible. And I think all of the general behavioral interview type stuff is also in the mix for testing some of those other attributes.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think oftentimes those case kind of questions, you know, even if it's not a formal case, they're really just trying to test, to assess how you think, and you should be thinking out loud essentially when you're describing your thought process and the like. And I think that's it's hard to master, but it's also a way for the interviewer to test, like, does this person actually have real experience in this, and can they tell me stories that can prove that, which I think is critical.
Totally.
So I actually just saw a question come in that I think was pretty interesting, which is, how do you prioritize which problems to work on? And then also, I guess it's a two-parter, how do you navigate disagreements between different stakeholders? So I don't know if there's like, if you get assigned specific problems that you need to tackle, or if it's more, a little bit more flexibility that you kind of prioritize your time, and also that follow-up I can ask again after that.
Sure. So we'll start with the first one. It depends on sort of the gravity, intensity of a problem, and the criticality in the time frame. It's typically a joint process, but you know the business is a business and it has its challenges, and so they're sort of like get your foundational stuff done before raising your hand for other interesting stuff is I think how I think about it, which is probably a good philosophy for life. So that's how prioritization is done. We'll have an exercise that, you know, periodically in terms of what is most important, how is our resourcing looking, how's our staffing looking, and then figure out what we can do. We can't do everything in a quarter. I mean, like there's almost always, no, there's without fail always more than we can do, and that's where prioritization matters. Where it is, what is the business impact, and how timely does this work?
Got it. So you measure it based on the impact to the business and how long it'll take.
Yeah. I mean, those are probably the two axes we look at. Not how long it would take, the impact to the business and when does it need to get done.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Okay.
And I'm curious actually about the second part of the question. You know, do you have maybe a specific story or time in mind where you needed to get something done, but it was a competing priority and there was disagreements across stakeholders? I mean, you mentioned like the ability to communicate, the ability to understand other people's roles and the like. How do you navigate those types of difficult situations?
Totally. So there's one project that I really, you know, now I can say enjoyed work on. Then it was very arduous. But it was basically reformulating one of our internal customer facing teams and thinking about what whether they should be aligned by function or by product. And these are very sticky problems and thorny problems because you're talking about adjusting the headcount that people have on their teams. You're talking about sort of changing people's jobs in their day-to-day and asking them to train for new things. So that was right off the bat fraught with a lot of diverse opinions and frankly conflicting incentive systems, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things I think you'll learn in these types of roles is that corporate America and I'm sure corporate world is sort of governed by incentives. And you have to understand what the incentives of the person across the table from you and how your recommendations affect them. So what I did was I was coming in as an outsider. I made it a point to sit with everyone in the vertical reporting chain, not obviously everybody in the organization, but a few people all the way down to understand how they thought about their functions and their roles, what would make them most effective, and sort of then doing the trade-offs, because there always need to be trade-offs. You're not going to make everybody happy, but at least doing so with a lens that was transparent on, okay, you know, Akshay is like connected with all of these people across these different geographical areas and these product teams. He's collected the inputs, and now this is what his recommendation is founded on, right? So when you can sort of do your best to communicate, here's all the work that went into this. We have acknowledged and valued everybody's input. And yet here is a criteria we're using to make our decision. That's an easier, I'm not saying easy, easier way forward in terms of getting buy-in from your leadership and the stakeholder teams.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I mean, look, if you are known within the organization as a type of person that is a great communicator, you're actually establishing a lot of social capital, and generally you're going to be seen as a tool for other teams to get things done, because they know that they can comfortably put you in front of another person, whether they're senior or junior, and you're going to be able to have an effective communication that'll then result in solving a problem or moving the ball forward on a particular challenge. The next part of your story that I want to focus on, and by the way, keep the questions going, these are great, folks, is X the Moonshot Factor. So something that I learned a few conversations ago with you is, while you were at Google and you're simultaneously doing your executive MBA at Columbia, you identified this cool opportunity within the company, and I want to hear how you even heard about this or how you identified it, that then you ended up getting, and essentially, that put you on a path to work on a smaller project, a smaller exciting project within Google, which from what I understand is kind of a rotational project that you're doing for about 6 months. So talk about how you identified it and how you actually, out of the thousands and thousands of people that are working in Google, and maybe presumably hundreds that are qualified and would be able to do the job well, how did you get that opportunity?
Yeah, totally. Fantastic question. I will start by saying the project itself is confidential, so I can't speak about that, but I think the journey is just interesting and hopefully useful. I think this is a great way to couch a larger conversation around internal mobility. So I'll start general and then I'll apply it to my story specifically. And I think, in the news media and sort of like the, whatever forums and whatnot, Google has a rap for giving people this free time to explore and try new things, right? So back in the old day, we had the formal 20% time where you could take a day off a week and work on whatever you wanted. That's evolved over time, but that philosophy of exploration and cross-pollination is still there. So I was candid. When I joined Google, I wanted to work in X specifically. I came to Google to work in X. I'm going to be very honest, right? So, and I knew that a strategy and operations organization was the best fit for my skill sets at the time, and a way for me to add value to the team. And it was a great way to also establish myself and network internally. Now that was 3 years ago, right? So some people move quicker, some people don't. But I do believe in establishing a foundation, and as you said, building that social capital in a way that when you raise your hand to try something new, it's supported because you have been a team player and supporting people on the way, right? I mean, one problem I see is I will see folks join and immediately want to do something else, and I think that's sort of in poor taste because you interviewed for a role that wasn't that, and B, sort of it's not a great way to understand the ecosystem better, right? So I did start exploring after a year, I definitely raised my hand a lot. I mean, I was 11 months into my role, and I was actually at SF at the time, and I was I want to move to New York. My sister was in New York at the time, and she was pregnant. I wanted to be close to my niece, and our strategy team was global, and that ended up working out, so that was fine. 6 months later, I applied and got into an executive MBA program. I wanted to do that and take time off, and sort of all of it was with this path of, okay, so at some point I'm going to make my way back to at least try to get my foot into the door at X. And I'd been having a lot of conversations along the way, and I had friends that were on the team. Those friends have since left, and then sort of at one point it was very serendipitous. I was sitting in my team room with my team, and I mentioned to a colleague after school's over, I'd love to go do a rotation or get a role at X, right? And she was like, well, I mean, do you have to wait? I mean, I have a friend who's doing a rotation right now at X. And she was based in New York, and I was based in New York. And for me, I always thought that the geographic aspect was a limitation, but I ended up connecting with her, and we had a great conversation, very passionate about the same sorts of ideals and same sorts of impact. She put me in touch with her manager, who sort of, and the one thing that I thought was very relevant to this conversation was, she said, we typically get a lot of folks sort of kicking the tire and they're interested in X and they don't really know why. But given you had a background and you demonstrated impact along the way, this is she was basically saying it exhibited a level of seriousness. And I think that is a lesson to take, where if you want to do something, like, there are so many people that want to do things, right? What are you doing to demonstrate in your free time that this is something that you really want to do, that you're qualified to do, and that you're passionate about? And I think those are the ways you set yourself apart. And that starts even before you get the job, right? I mean, like, I don't want to make any assumptions about people's free time levels. And obviously people are in very different life situations, but areas where you can find to skill up and just learn about things that you're passionate about goes a long way, right? You speak more knowledgeably about the subject matter, all of that. So I believe that's what put me apart. I had 2-3 more conversations with folks on the team after that. We decided it was a good fit. And as I said before, given sort of I had quote unquote paid my dues, but I also was very transparent with my manager at the time that these were sort of areas I was interested in. We ended up working it out. So here I am.
I love that. I mean, look, time and time again, this is our 7th session. I think people that have been here before recognize that opportunities come to people, A, that prioritize actually building relationships, but B, that know how to ask, nudge along the right relationships when need be. Nothing is going to happen. No one's sitting there waiting for you to give you an opportunity. Does it happen sometimes where somebody thinks of you and brings you in because you're top of mind? Sure. But it's much more likely to happen, or you're much more likely to be top of mind if you put yourself in that position, if you continuously follow up. But I'm curious about that last part that you just mentioned, is, find opportunities to skill up in the areas to make yourself stand out. So I don't know how much specifics you can offer there, but what did you do to skill up in that sort of narrow discipline or become a domain expert, to stand out?
Yeah. So, I mean, this might be cheating a little bit, but like my research fellowship was in that topic. So that helped quite a bit. When I was in consulting, I supported some sort of nonprofit initiatives that the company sponsored in that space as well. And, like I demonstrated in my coursework at school and in my MBA recently. So I think there's a little bit of everything. It was sort of like a long thread that sort of ran throughout. It wasn't start to finish, but um, that being said, there was like, I really wanted this, like there's not often things that you really want. And I think when you really want something, you can be inspired to execute quite a bit. I think that shone through as well. So.
Yeah, people can tell when it's something that you really want. I mentioned the story before, but Sergey and I have been running a podcast for 2 years, and all of a sudden we're seen as podcast experts. We do it on our free time. And yeah, we are actually experts now, having done it for 2 years, but it's something that you go really deep on, and you don't have to you don't have to go to grad school to become an expert in something. You just have to allocate the time and continue to invest in your own personal learning. That's awesome. Sergey, I think you had another question.
So but just to finish that thought, one thing on that point specifically, one thing that I've seen work for a lot of folks internally is they'll go do work for free for another team, right? And again, that is a privileged position to have the time to do that. But they'll go do 20% work and work on this team for how many ever months, and then when a role opens up, they're sort of the first in line because you've already worked with them, they have the skills, etc. And I believe there are analogs in not within the corporate ecosystem, right? There's like, go support a nonprofit that you want to, if you want to go learn how to operate a business, right? That's a great way to do it. Go volunteer that way. But anyway, so I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's great. And we have about 13 minutes left here, and I want to make sure that if anybody else has questions, you drop them in now so that we have time to ask them. But I wanted to shift gears just a little bit and ask you about what potential systems, tools, maybe frameworks that you've learned over the last several years are really useful for you. You mentioned obviously being able to know how to analyze and clean up and analyze data using tools like SQL and even Excel. Getting good at that for a strategy and operations role is really important. What are the types of tools, technologies, or maybe even frameworks that you can think of that you learned do you think people should invest time in learning if they wanted an operations job like this?
Yeah, I think great question. I think let me think about. I will say that there are a couple of consulting case interview books that I think for any strategy role is a phenomenal way to skill up quickly if you haven't done the job. I don't want to call them out by name. Do your own research, but Google consulting case prep and see what works for you. There are a lot of opportunities out there, and I think that was a great way to think in a structured way, or at least call myself out when I wasn't like, when I was sort of like just word vomiting or not really being judicious and thoughtful about how I was approaching problems. So that's one thing, and I think I learned a tremendous amount from that. And just for any like corporate business interview in the future, I think the consulting case method is a phenomenal way to approach it. Right? It's almost like training for a marathon and then running a 5K is easier. Right? It's like so. So that's how I think about consulting case prep. And that was like when I was in consulting, I was using that for some of my Google interviews as well. And then what else? Sorry. For some reason, my computer screen locked it once in a while. I think on the job, like I mentioned, the analytical workflow of learning just some basic SQL. I mean, if you can, a lot of this you can also learn on the job. Like I don't think you have to go take a SQL course or whatever. Just like if it comes up in an interview, and it may, know that like this is a requirement in the job and that you're willing to learn it. It's not, like if you're somewhat analytically proficient, it's not the hardest thing to do. Dare I say that. And then general spreadsheet acumen is vital, right? I mean, like, do you know how to do a pivot table? Do you know how to like run a regression? Do you know how to like build a forecast? Things like that. And I think those are really strong skills. And then like PowerPoint, or we use the Google Suite, obviously, which I've come to cherish for its collaboration ability. But these are all sorts of basic things that I think that are table stakes for what you need to know. Many roles may have similar but different requirements, right? It'll all be based on whatever productivity stack they use, right? So project management tools are becoming increasingly popular. So that's your Monday.com, your Asanas of the world. Those are becoming relevant. So the more experience you have with project management software, the better. So you can hit the ground running, but that'll be based off of what the team uses individually. If you're joining a more technically focused team, things like Jira and sort of like all of those more technical facing workflow management tech tools are useful. But I wouldn't, and there's like Tableau and stuff for data visualization. I don't know that I recommend going out to learn all those. I think it's like understand the process, understand the role and the value, and I think it was focus on those three things. Gain the three things I talked about earlier. It's like problem solving, analytical skill sets, and stakeholder management. Gain practical applied experience in those with impact, and show that you can execute at a high level and create sort of positive impact out of that. And I think that goes a lot longer and farther than learning individual skills.
Got it. That's really helpful. And I think those are some great general tips for things that people can skill up on their own time. I have a kind of a unique question, and here it is. Like, if you, let's say you had an opportunity in the next month or so to hire someone for your team. I have no idea how you guys actually do your recruiting, but let's say you put up an open call there on the Google website where anybody can apply. What kind of person or experience would pique your interest that wasn't obvious? Like someone that doesn't have a brand name, business school or consulting company or iBanking job or brand name tech company they were part of. It's maybe a little bit non-traditional. You mentioned like some people that were in sales could be good for a role like that. But how might somebody present themselves to stand out to you where it would pique your interest? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot asking this pretty random question, but I think it's kind of hard to get those logos on your resume.
It's hard to get those logos for sure. And it's also hard to, there's this black box application process is discouraging, generally speaking, right? It's hard. So I like to see examples of resilience and grit, right? I mean, not everybody has these sorts of opportunities available to them. How are you spending your time to show that you care and that you're passionate and that you're skilled otherwise, right? I think those are big things. I think that, I think that's a good place to start. I think these are hard questions, and I think I might approach it differently if I was in a startup than at Google, because at Google there's sort of like we are able to communicate with the recruiting teams on what we're looking for and what skill sets we're looking for. And the important thing is we index on the skill sets, right? We index on the skill sets, and in my mind, I don't index on the blue chip status as much because I think a lot of this is privilege based as well. So there's something to be said about that. So find ways to assemble that experience, because let me sort of be honest and candid for a second, or rather let me emphasize that aspect, is this is a numbers game, right? I mean, and big tech recruiting is sort of based off of that principle, and these are how the supply and demand dynamics work. So if you have maybe not this super traditional background, what are you doing to make up for it, right? And I think that great ways to do that are network your ass off, right? I mean, I networked. I had a good friend who worked at Google, and I reached out to him. I was like, hey, will you refer me? And then he spent time with me, and he sort of he walked me through some of what I'm doing now in terms of what are the values, what are the skill sets. That really helps. I will say, don't use referrals as a blanket sort of untargeted tool, because recruiters are very good at sniffing out what is a vacuous reference. They really wait on the quality of the recommendation. So if you have connections at a company, prioritize the ones that know you the best and know your work the best, right? Because we are asked to write up an evaluation based off of our experience with you. And I've had people reach out to me for referrals, and if I can't speak super knowledgeably to that, I try to be honest and be like, look, I may not be the best person to refer you. But that being said, it is, this is such a networking heavy world we live in. So anything you can do to build those relationships, earn the skill sets, and sort of be I mean, like I said, I made it to 2 final rounds before landing at Google, right? And that is an arduous process. I'm sure many of you know, which is you get so invested in a job and you make it to the final round, you think you for sure killed it. And it just came down to maybe someone else like that, right? And you have to pick yourself up and keep going. And even the ones that quote unquote made it, because everyone's still searching for something else in their life. It's a process, and you're going to see failure along the way, but it's not a personal indicator at all, right? It's what can you learn from this opportunity, and how can you sort of grow the next time?
I mean, that's absolutely right. If for the most part, people that were successful experienced success over and over again, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but they would be soft. In other words, the people that actually end up being successful, they know how to deal with moments of failure. They also recognize the fact that if you're just going to tally up the number of times you failed versus the number of times you succeeded, you're going to have a lot more failures for sure. And you have to be okay with the fact that, look, the world doesn't owe you anything. You might be a great fit for something, but it may be somebody was feeling off the day they spoke with you, or you didn't hit on the exact right points and something didn't align. It doesn't mean you should quit and give up. If anything, that just means you need to either adjust your approach or just try again. You mentioned the word, it's a numbers game. It is a numbers game, especially in a massive organization. It's going to be a numbers game, especially a recognizable brand like Google that everybody wants a job in. Sometimes the stars do have to align. But I'm curious about you and your goals now and your path, because you just said, no one kind of gets to a certain level and kind of gives up, right? Everyone has the next thing that they want to do. Most recently for you, that was joining the smaller project at Google. But what do you think is the next goal for you? And how are you thinking about, aside from building the right relationships, how are you thinking about positioning yourself to actually get to it?
Yeah, totally. I think about this day in, day out, and it's constantly evolving. So, there's no figured it out, steady state. I think it's a continuous journey. I was again fortunate enough, and I use that word because it is truly good graces that I just finished my executive MBA at Columbia, and that in and of itself was a great transformational experience in terms of how I think about myself, and the skill sets that I have, and the aspirations that I had. And coming out of that, I found that I take to general management really well. I'd love to start a startup in deep tech one day, or run a team doing some really impactful work. And I think that general manager role is, there's literally no easy way to get there. It's not it's a very the chaos is a ladder, Game of Thrones analogy, right? It's like the stars have to align to get it. But I can do what is within my capacity to get there, which is build the right skill sets that I know of, right? Continue to seek out mentorship and guidance from those that have trodden the path and tell me how they see the world, and continue to learn and be curious and grow. So, like, if you're asking me what I think that I'm going to be doing is over the coming, couple years, is seeking out the experiences I value in a general manager role, and sort of like how I see those talents and experiences aligning, which I think is ample doses of business development leadership, product leadership, understanding the technicals. Like, I don't think you have to lead or code, but lead engineering teams or code, but understand enough to be proficient and fluent so you can sort of engage with engineers in a meaningful way. There's an inordinate amount of selling that you do as general manager, which is, you have to sell your vision upwards to your stakeholders. You have to fundraise. You have to build narratives and convey narratives and communicate. So and then finally, I think you have to allocate capital. You have to allocate capital extremely well. One second. Keep talking out. So it's a hodgepodge of all of those things, and I don't think I'm going to get all of those skill sets in the next 6 months, but I'm going to continue to sort of grow and see how each of these different aspects of me develops and informs my next steps. Right? I mean, I could want something totally different in 2 years, and that's sort of hopefully a product of forward progress and growth and learning more about myself and the opportunities around me.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Akshay. And I think that the more time you have to spend at this organization, I think that gives you more of an opportunity even to learn about what it is that you want yourself. Sometimes that just takes time. And I think if you continue building the right relationships and adding value in the organization, then you will get people to help you and sponsor you regardless of what that next step is going to be. So I really appreciate that. So we just came up on the hour at 7 o'clock. Akshay, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions and walking us through your career journey. Everybody's career is different, but actually there's a couple themes here that you mentioned that we've heard many times actually in the last 7 sessions. One of them is this grit and resilience, and thinking about how you can demonstrate that. And oftentimes that can be through your own side projects and ventures is critical in any role that you want to get. I want to also just remind people that if you want access to this recording, please go to school16.co/survey. It was really helpful for us to get your direct feedback, about how these sessions went, how we can improve them and the like. So please, it takes about a minute to fill out the survey. We'd love for you to do that. And finally, if you want more than just once a week sessions and you want to dive deep with instructors in smaller class sizes and learn more about operations, sales, product, and marketing, we have our program that's starting on June 15th. It's a 2-month part-time online program, and we'd love to have you apply. And if you have any questions, please do email us those as well. So thanks again, Akshay. Thank you so much once again for coming, and to everybody else that joined us for the call. Vadim just dropped those links here in the session, in the chat here. But thank you to everybody, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you, Akshay.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everybody.
Cheers. All right, everybody. Have a good
Thank you, Akshay.
rest of your week. Hopefully everybody stays healthy, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Right.